Go ahead.
I am so glad to be here. As Will said, I'm Katherine Rose-Mockry, and I couldn't be more excited to work with Will. We had a lot of wonderful collaborations in the past. One of the sad parts of retirement is you don't get as many opportunities to do that, so I'm thrilled to be here. I am very excited. I should have a book to hold up to show you. My book, which was just released, I believe this week, Liberating Lawrence, Gay Activism in the 1970s at the University of Kansas. Yay. So I also want to welcome all the people who are on the live stream. And is there an option for them to submit a question?
There is, and if they submit questions, I have the option of displaying them on the screen, and I can give you those questions at the end when we get to the question part.
Great. I see faces that I believe I saw when I was an undergrad. How many of you were around in the 70s in Lawrence? A lot of you. How many were on campus in Lawrence in the 70s? A lot of you. How many were enjoying protests on campus in the 70s? Interesting. Just about the same number of hands all three times. Well, I was so excited to write about this. I was on campus as well in the 70s. I was a little distracted. I came here as a transfer student in music, and so I sort of lived in the practice rooms. But I do have a sense of the campus in the 70s and the town in the 70s, which is a really essential part of this whole story. It wouldn't be the same story without the goings-on in Lawrence. How many of you heard of the Lawrence Gay Liberation Front when you were on campus? Well, more hands than I was afraid I'd see. That's great. And I hope a bunch of you at home raised your hands too. In the 1970s, in 1970 to be exact, a really exciting thing happened. A bunch of very determined students got together, shook up the campus, and started the Lawrence Gay Liberation Front. And before I get going too far, I want to mention, as probably everyone is aware, language has evolved a lot over the years, certainly since the 1970s. And the correct words to use have changed. And I am using the words that were prominent in the 1970s, referring to gay and lesbian primarily. There were many bisexual people, but it really wasn't talked about. I spoke to people I interviewed who said, you just didn't mention it. It was sort of a hush-hush thing. You weren't really accepted. And transgender was just not a term. I believe it was 1975 that term was first introduced. So, and queer was not at all what it means now. It was mostly negative, except for people within the group. So, wanted to make that clear so you didn't wonder why I was using particular terms or not. So what is the story about? It looks at the important role of LGLF in really moving forward the Midwest in the national effort to advance gay rights. When you read a lot of the literature, as I was getting books out from the library, they're on the West Coast and the East Coast. Florida had some stuff going on, definitely Chicago, but the rest, and that is Midwest, but the rest of the Midwest was sort of like a big hole. And that really wasn't true. There was a lot going on. And certainly Lawrence was one of the leaders in moving forward in activism, in increasing visibility and getting the word out. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. Another thing that I think is really important about this book, it is in the voice of the people who lived the experience, who were there. A lot of books you can read, they have really wonderful research quoted, but this is directly from the people who were doing the work, who were there in the trenches. I think their words are more powerful than anybody's, so that's the focus of this book. Apologize, sore throat. The other thing that's important is it's not just about rehashing this very important history, but it's taking this history and saying, what do we do now? We are in the throes of some very important times. What can we take from this history to bring it forward and apply it to today? And I think we all know there's a lot of need to apply it. During this time, I'm sorry, may we go forward on the slides? And one. And.
You're on local national climate.
Perfect. Wrong glasses. Anyways, some of the things that could, when you look at today and you look at 1970, most of you, many of you who are around in the 70s know there have been quite a few changes, but for a young student on campus right now, they may not realize that people who are gay and lesbian could be fired from their job for no just cause, denied housing. We had an example of that I included in the book. Arrested, expelled from school. And there's a lot about that in the book too. Target of hate crimes, which certainly still happens today. This was a real serious one, denied internships or certifications, licenses, which made it very intimidating to be recognized because you didn't want, as one person I talked about in the book, got through the end of his education program and was not allowed to student teach because they discovered he was gay. And certainly ostracized. And what makes this really problematic is there were no opportunities for recourse. The mission of this group was to, I have a slide that has some, the actual document that they put forward, but I want to talk about the climate first. But they wanted to address the hostile climate, demand civil rights, and provide a safe space where students could be themselves. They did this without mentors, without a roadmap. Who was there to look to give any direction? And certainly student groups have advisors. There were no advisors on campus who could say, here people, here's how you do it. So it was all their own impetus, their own initiative that had them go forward. I want to talk a little bit about the climate. I bet some of you will have fond memories as I talk about it. So this is a slide of a Lawrence protest. It was certainly an anti-war protest, as you can see from the banner. There was a lot going on with the Vietnam War. There was on campus, some of you may have participated. There was a protest. There were over 1,000 people that marched down Jayhawk Boulevard. Anybody participate in that one? How exciting. And that was a real big focus here. It was a time in Lawrence of a mix of very progressive people and very conservative people, which made for a very unsettled environment. And there were pockets throughout the community. It was not all a bed of roses. It was, there was a lot of challenge and discord among the two opposing groups. And not all the conservative people were really thrilled to have activists in their town. So keeping that in mind, bring this group into the fold. You're thinking we have the activist group, the conservative group, gay and lesbian issues, gay rights were not approved anywhere. What a challenge it was for the people who got together in 1970 and said, let's go forward and do something. So the way this started, it's not the conventional way you would imagine. I'd start out by saying, in 1968, with all the goings on related to the war, there wasn't a lot going on related to gay rights. So people who were interested and concerned about gay rights tend to filter into some of the other groups and find people of like minds. And in those groups, as people talked, the energy for gay rights started growing. And in 1970, by coincidence, David Stout, who was on campus, was in an undergrad program. Thank you. Thank you very much. Was doing a class project for his social work class. And he chose to interview people in Kansas City, Lawrence, and Topeka about services for people who are gay and lesbian. And a wide range of ages, from high school all the way up to people working and above that. And completed the project and turned it in, and a young person who had participated, a young male, came to him and said, you need to be pulling a group together. Look at all the research you did. And he said, not interested, I did it for a project, I'm done, thank you, I'll incorporate it some other time. He was really adamant and insistent. David said, no, thank you. Went on, well, a couple weeks later, lo and behold, all around campus, there are these flyers that say, out of the Johns and into the streets, get out of the Johns and find a meaningful quality of existence as a gay person. Call Gay Liberation at Stout's personal phone number. Oh. I was sort of surprised to find that out. He went back to the place he was living, and his good friend Elaine, who was lesbian, he said to her, I don't know what I'm going to do. She said, have a meeting, I'll be there to help you, we'll figure it out. And so we did. They had that first meeting, and that young student who came to talk to him wasn't at the meeting, but 7 other people were. They had a really great discussion. They got together for another meeting, and they created a vision statement. There's a lot you can do in a group like that, and maybe we go forward on the slides. I'm being a very bad slide
Just tell me when to go forward, Kathy.
Yes.
LGLF vision statement.
Thank you. So this is a statement they put together. I'm not going to read it for you, because I know you can do that while I am talking about it. But they went through the night and they put this together. Next slide. All ready for the next one?
Can you make that any bigger?
No, this is as big as it gets.
Okay.
Sorry.
I can't read
I can send it to you. Happy to do that. I know, that's why I have these glasses on. The same reason. Take a minute for this slide. Ready for slide number 3. If I were wise, I would have copied this and read it, but happy to send it to anybody who would like it.
Or buy the book.
Buy the book, it's right in there. Thank you, yay, Michael. Yeah, so one of the little perks I put in, if you buy the book, you get the whole thing. Not quite fair. Anyways, as they got together, they came up with ideas. It didn't happen all at once. There were a lot of meetings, and in the beginning, a big focus was on what you would call today. They were called. It's embarrassing. I'm forgetting the name. Groups where people would come together and support groups. Thank you. And there was so much to talk about. People felt very siloed and all by themselves. And that was an important part of, as the group grew, to decide what is it that we can accomplish and we need to do. And they came up with a number of things to bring about change. We can go to the next slide. And I bet that's not big enough either. I'm going to call on my son. Would you mind reading that?
Oh, sure. This is from Kathy Hoggard, director of the KU Information Center from 1973 to 79. We were not looking to experts of the past because they didn't know about the world. It's happening here and now. We are inventing it.
And that seemed to be the way it went. It wasn't like you would go back, there would be lots of experts to count on, but during that time, there was an interest in breaking from the past and creating a new system, a new world. And so they looked to themselves to come up with the way they wanted to approach this issue. One of the things that they wanted to do was to increase visibility. And we can go to the next one. And I'm going to go through the ways they wanted to bring about change, and then I'm going to go through these slides. So by increasing visibility, essentially people who were gay and lesbian worked very hard to be hidden. Lots of stories in the book about the ways, the depths of people's efforts to hide and be not discovered. And so by being visible, being out and visible was really a big step. And that was one thing this group was known for. They did that in a lot of ways. I found something interesting when I was looking through the UDK, University Daily Kansan. I was looking around, I wanted to see what happened when Stonewall happened, how it was covered here. Easy to forget, no cell phones, no internet, the way people found out about world news, you all know this, you look to the paper. So what was in the paper to chronicle what happened at Stonewall? So I started in June 30th, keeping in mind to do so over the summer for students. And I looked in the Lawrence Journal World. In the Journal World, starting June 30th, on July 5th, we had, on 6:30, there was Bride of the Week. And in July 7th, we had Julie Nixon Eisenhower provided personal White House tours to 25 guests. Nothing about Stonewall. That kept going. There was nothing. I thought, surely in a week or two it would pop up. There wasn't anything. So Granted, that was in New York and we are in Kansas, but I think it's very telling that visibility was pretty non-existent. Another thing that was really important was education. And the group, right early on in their development, were doing speaking engagements to classes, to groups, and that started very early on. They created a speakers bureau, and that lasted all the way up to the 90s, which then it was taken over by other entities, but when a group is forming, that's sort of unusual. I have advised student groups. Usually in the very beginning, things don't materialize that quickly. Activism was a big part of their agenda. And there's lots and lots of examples. There's one slide I'll show you in a moment, Into the Streets Week, where they, in fact, Michael, I can put you on the spot. Michael Stubbs here, right in the front. Like, thank you, Kathy. Called to get the group involved in a event called Into the Streets Week with the Ladies Guild of the Chamber of Commerce. And groups would go out and clean up the alleys and make Lawrence a prettier city. And the whole group showed up, and it was fortunate, serendipitous, that a group had just come through New York, and they got those people to join in too. So they had a huge group to go and participate in the Streets Week. Many wore dresses and combat boots, and some wore aprons. I didn't see any women in the picture. I don't think women joined. Were there women? I'm not sure, but I think the aim was to be more visible to the community at large while doing community service. Pretty creative. Other examples, I'm not going to go over a lot today. What the group is often known the best for is a lawsuit they brought forward against the university because the university would not recognize them as an official student group. And while Student Senate voted for the group to be recognized 3 times, Chancellor Chalmers vetoed it 3 times. And the group said, we've gone all the ways we can go, we're gonna go the whole route. And they took a case forward. The case started in 1971. They put forward they got the suit going, activated the process, and it was denied. They appealed it, but they did not in the end win the suit. But as you read through, which I hope you do, it was not necessarily a loss. In many ways, I think they were the winners despite losing that lawsuit. And in fact, a year later, they were able, because of a change in campus policy, to become a recognized student group. So they won the war, as they say. But there were other very notable kinds of activism that took place. Housing, there were members of the group that were kicked out of their housing. The group took action. In addition, employment practices, a lot of protests, a lot of protest signs, and there was a Gay Rights Act resolution that they brought forward to all 3 Douglas County Democrats local unit caucuses, and it was passed. It did not win at the larger level at the convention in Florida, but that's pretty impressive to get all three of the groups in Lawrence to, in Douglas County. So activism was pretty central. Community building, lots of social events I heard, lots of great social events. And they were known for that. And not just social events within the group, but they did a lot of reaching out to others. And in fact, there was even one exchange with a fraternity where they came into the fraternity, members of LGLF, and to educate members of the fraternity and get them to know them as people. Instead of, it's such a divide between, at that point, between fraternities and LGLF members. In fact, they figured a lot of the prank calls that they got on their hotline were from fraternity members. Despite the fact there probably were many, many gay members in those fraternities. Support was very important, just support for gay and lesbian people on campus. They had a peer helpline since about the beginning of when they started. Probably it began in 1971, I believe, and it was in members' homes, and got a lot of calls. And then in 1973, Elaine Reisman, who was one of the founding members, was in social work, and as her social work practicum, created a counseling program, Gay Counseling Service, GCS, and it was very, very successful, and they did it with no funding. It was basically two people, three people, David Stout, Elaine, and a third member of the group. And at one point, they needed to recreate and bring in more people. They could not handle the load. They almost disbanded, but they were able to bring in the people. I'm not entirely sure when it went away. I think in 1979, I saw an ad in the UDK which looked like that service no longer existed, but there's not really an indication. And of course, advocacy. One of the things the group is very well known for is challenging existing norms and stereotypes. And one of the ways they did that was certainly through dress, as you will see in some of these slides, but also in challenging people in daily activities. So I'm going to go through those slides now. Here is a picture at Venus, which was a house they all lived in, or many lived in that house. And it was in the old Oregon neighborhood. A lot of student houses were down there. And this included that group from New York. And I can't identify in that picture. Anybody who would like to identify some of the Lawrence members, please do. But as you can tell, it looks like an old Lawrence house. But you see some of the members had skirts, had beads and earrings and whatnot. Again, with that idea of challenging stereotypes. Next slide, please. This is the slide I told you about the cleanup. And unfortunately, it's a little hard to see, but if you can make out the images, it's some of the group who are out there with brooms and mops and rakes cleaning up. Next slide.
Venus, 924 New Hampshire Street.
Thank you.
Now Lawrence Art Center.
Yes. This is where the Venus House was. Any of you who have walked past the Lawrence Arts Center, we were going to try to put up a plaque outside, but we were concerned it would be lost in the shuffle. But it's pretty exciting that right there on New Hampshire Street. Thank you. I can't wear two glasses at the same time. I appreciate it. You'll be my eyes. Let's go to the next one.
LGLF Dance Hot to Trot, January 26, 1973.
So dances were a big thing. The best dances around, I heard. All sorts of people went. Families went. Families brought their kids. Most people loved them. Some people didn't like that atmosphere, that they wanted it to be more a place to meet people. When it was so broad, they felt it had been watered down a bit in what they were looking for. But at one point, there were like 1,000 people. I don't know how they fit them all in, but especially any of you that know the ballroom, it must have been really impressive. It started out with 200-300 people, which is a good turnout in the beginning, and it grew and grew and grew. So next slide. Oh, I do have to mention it costs a whopping 50 cents to get in.
Women's Community.
So I want to switch gears a bit. When I did my dissertation on this topic, I focused on the Lawrence Gay Liberation Front. It began with a mix of men and women, males and females. We didn't have people identified as non-binary at the time, but the intention was it would be a truly mixed group. And it was started out with both a male and a female co-president, co-leader, and lasted for a while. The first group of people, David Stout left campus, Elaine left the group. She was also the co-president. And in a couple of years, the leadership was all male. And at some point, women stopped coming. And there's some information in the book about why that might be, but it became a group where it didn't really meet the needs or speak to a lot of the women on campus. And keeping in mind that a lot of women during that time identified as feminists first. So much going on campus, those needs seem so critical. Issues with employment, with health care, you name it. Women felt really pulled into addressing those issues, which weren't the primary issues on the gay agenda. And so for that reason, women didn't feel quite like they were getting their issues met. So that being the case, a lot of women gathered together and met at this place called South Farm. I'm being very careful to characterize it because when I first talked to people, it seemed like that was a set thing that everybody knew about South Farm. And I later talked to somebody who was involved, who felt very strongly that's not what South Farm was. So it's important to know not all people viewed it as a feminist lesbian gathering spot, but it was for many, many people. Next slide.
Softball.
So the women had a different approach than the men and the LGLF group. And they were effective in their affiliations and their collaborations. One of the things that they were involved in was softball. It was a big thing on the campus. Any of you on softball leagues, they were everywhere. I was terrible. But they formed a softball group, and they were very good. And there were a lot of women that had been very involved in sports, and they advanced. It was through the rec and parks, and they advanced very quickly up to the next level, the next tier. And they existed for a couple of years, but the further up they went, the more they were overshadowed by the true athletes, that they were doing it for fun. And that was not, as you went up, the focus. Bill?
Do you remember what they called the team?
This was within the group. Archie Dykes was the chancellor, right? Archie's Dykes. They were very proud of that name. And I asked a number of people to make sure I didn't just take it from one person. Everybody said, oh yeah, Archie's Dykes. But they never said it out loud to Archie. So nobody's surprised. But it was a big draw, and anyways, thank you very much, Will. So there were a lot of women that were involved in softball. Next.
Women's Music Collective.
Yes. I'm getting nods, so I'm thinking many of you know of these different groups, and do let me know when I'm getting close on time.
Okay.
Thank you. I wish I could have heard them. They were great. Actually, I did. They had a reunion in 2021. We had a reunion, and some of them were able to come back and they performed. It was amazing, very exciting. But they played all over town to packed groups, and they played in Off the Wall Hall, which is now, thank you. And they were packed with all sorts of people. It wasn't just the women, the lesbian group. Everybody came and filled the chairs, and they would sing louder than the group and joining in. So it was a well-loved group. Some of the people went on, one of the women in the group, Katherine Rose-Mockry, if anybody knows of her, she went on and is playing in Kansas City. So a lot of talented women. Next, oh, and those are kazoos in their mouth. They were known for their kazoo playing.
Woman's Space, September 1st, 1976.
Some of you remember?
Yes.
Yeah. This was such an important thing. I know that on campus, many women were served by the Adina Women's Office and the loosely put together women's center that really wasn't a center, that was a group of students that met out of an office. But the ability to help was pretty limited. There was no service for women who were assaulted, who were in domestic violence situations, and women in the community needed help, definitely. So there was a call in the community, we need a women's center for those of us in the community. And so there was a move to create Woman's Space. This is their spot. The day that they signed over the papers to take over the house. Unfortunately, and they had a lot of wonderful programs. There were a lot of things aimed at for the use of that house. Practice space for the Women's Music Coalition. They ended up finding a different space that worked better. They felt very strongly it should not be an overnight stay for women who were abused for lots of safety reasons. And counseling got off to a slow start. They wanted to have legal services, but tragically, the woman who was going to do that died, and they could not continue those services. So they had trouble gaining speed, and it lasted for a couple of years. But through that process, some of the services that now exist in town for women, what is now Willow, came out of some of the meetings at that woman's space. And certainly RVSS, Rape Victim Survivor Service, a lot of the conversations led to that too. So we owe a lot to the work that came out of there. Next.
Impact on other Kansas Regents campuses.
We didn't operate in a vacuum, again, because communication was limited. Couldn't communicate a lot, but LGLF and then what became GSOC, Gay Services of Kansas, and then GLSOK, Gay and Lesbian Services of Kansas, did have a large influence. And you look around and see many of the programs that were initiated by LGLF were instituted later on other campuses. And at Wichita State, they lobbied against Anita Bryant, who came to campus, and there was a bill that came forward in Wichita, which Anita Bryant was supporting, supporting the having the bill banned, and the Wichita LGLF group, that wasn't their name, but got it, lobbied hard, but they were not as, did not have the political clout that Anita Bryant did. So it did not pass. But I think that's another interesting component of the LGLF. They were more political than any of the other campuses, and were under the eye of the regents, and came under much more conflict from the regents and the legislature because of that. But they made a tremendous difference. So I want to stop here. If we could go to the next slide.
From their viewpoint, early LGLF members.
And how much time do I have left?
You have about 9 minutes.
Wonderful. I am so excited. I could go on and on, as you can tell. That's why I have notes, because I could really talk until about 9 o'clock tonight. You don't need that. But I think it's even more profound if you listen to some of the people that were actually there. And I've asked some of them if they are willing to come forward. You're welcome to sit in these chairs and turn around. What are you comfortable doing?
Yeah, let's do it.
Or stay in your seat.
Now have them come up.
Come up, that's the consensus.
Okay. It's just like the old days.
Is there anybody back there I'm missing? Just like the old days, that's right.
If you recognize us, you belong up here.
Well, after 50 years, we may not look quite the same.
I look better. I don't know about you. In fact, we were very badly dressed in those days. I'd say it like this. In fact, we were very badly dressed. We learned to dress better.
So would you go down and introduce yourselves and take a moment and talk about your recollections, what you took with you from those days, from that group to now?
I can start.
Okay, that's good.
Well, mine, isn't life interesting?
The Sharon Mayer.
I'm sure, yes.
Yes.
Whoever would have guessed over 50 years ago, when we were with our friends and housemates in our Orion neighborhood doing all the stuff we did, that someday I would be here with this. I'm just stunned. And I would have to say, not that my life has been dull, but that still, even still, this period was one of the most exciting and important in many ways in my life. It was an incredible time to be in Lawrence. The sense of community was, I think, amazing. I mean, it really was. And it was a great time because you could work for things and they happened. Childcare, let's work on an underground newspaper. Let's get a food co-op started. Let's get, all kinds of, like the house for the women, women's house. All kinds of things that just people, they didn't need a government program. They didn't need somebody to tell them. They just all got together and made it happen. And it was pretty amazing, and I have to say that when I went through the pictures in the book here a little earlier, and it's just incredible because, yes, this was half a century ago. And when I see the pictures of my friends and these people that I knew, it's like the wink of an eye. It's like I'm there again. And
That explains why I'm only 5 years older.
I'm 5 years younger.
So it's a competition now.
I don't know. So I feel like I took a lot away from that. And one of the things that so this summer in June, I was downtown at the Pride Parade. And I was like every year they've had this, it's gotten bigger. I was just amazed at how many people were there. And it was really cool because, this was lots of families with their kids, lots of people with shirts on that said proud parents. Everybody was having such a great time. The parade had like 4 churches, the Girl Scouts, the library, there were all kinds of people, and just people, on their own showed up. And it was really like, I felt like kind of like the fruit of what has started so long ago. To see that it had grown into this, and to see how people could come and just be themselves like this. And Lawrence is a great place for that. I'm really going to have to say, I think it's probably not perfect, but there's lots and lots of support for being yourself here. And so I feel very lucky to have been here for all of this, when it happened and even now. So before I just babble on forever here.
Very good.
We met in the early 70s and we were wild and crazy kids together.
Some wilder than others. So you're looking at me. So my name is Stephen Weaver, and I was thrilled to see my name in print in the book. So not too many books about me. Should be more.
You're in there a lot, yeah.
I don't know. I didn't make it till page 22. I don't.
Oh,
I was counting. Your question was, what happened then that we took away for the future? And what happened then, coming to Lawrence and beginning gay liberation was something that coincided with me coming out. It was sort of the impetus for me coming out. So it changed my life from night to day. I was really grateful for you putting that kind of first chapter about the atmosphere and the context and the way things were at that period of time. It was a very unusual and interesting time. I think there's a saying that's going around right now about this summer, which is that sometimes decades happen in weeks and sometimes weeks go for decades. So this was definitely a time when a lot was happening in a very short space of time. And I think some things changed. People were really ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the idea came, people were ready to respond to that. I think one of the biggest things for me is about gay liberation was it was based on kind of a very simple idea, which is that if people would stop hiding and come out of the closet, everyone would see what's going on and it would change things. In fact, that's exactly what happened. And it happened at a very quickly accelerating rate. So, in 1970, we're in Kansas, we're starting gay liberation, or right thereabouts. And then a couple years later, I was in Chicago and I was going to these huge discos that were filled with people that had never existed before. The type of bar you would have in Chicago, before that would be a small bar. You might even get arrested in the bar. So things really changed dramatically. And then they just continued to spiral till it took several decades to get gay marriage. It took a long time for gay people to get into the military. Of course, in our time, we didn't want to be in the military, but that's different.
Who's signing up for that?
So I mean, I took a lot away from it. It really changed my life and turned my life in a whole different direction. And I just wish somebody had told me that when you come out 5 years later, you're going to have to do it again. Because every time I moved or went someplace or changed a job or whatever, I found myself going through the same process again. And it really wasn't always that easy. So you're always faced with these sort of compromises and about telling who you are and being honest about who you are. So, but I learned a pretty good lesson. So.
How much time, Will?
We have about a minute.
Okay.
Michael.
We had a couple
I'm
more
off the
minutes.
hook.
You have to extend that.
Well, then I'll just say something brief. I think what I took away from it was I found family and the concept of creating your own family with like-minded people. Because most of us came out of, especially coming from rural Kansas, like David Stout, he came out of a very conservative religious family, and it was very hard to break out of that. And then all of a sudden to come to Lawrence and that whole fantastic energy that's reflected in the music of the time. And then just finding like-minded people. And I think I've done that my whole life now. So I'm very grateful, I have to say in my 30 seconds, I'm very grateful to Kathy for writing this book.
Yes.
Because
Congratulations.
I was worried that it would be lost.
No way.
Well,
We hear you. No way is this getting lost in time. We hear you.
And as she said, the book, it's all people, us telling our story. I mean, you did an amazing job.
Gentlemen, I came here to Lawrence as a KU freshman in the fall of 1971 from Junction City, Kansas. And I will tell you that Junction City, Kansas is not only, at least in the early 1970s, there was a lot of racism and a lot of anti-gay bias.
Mhm.
I came here specifically because there was a group called the Gay Liberation Front that was connected to campus, even though it wasn't allowed to meet on campus. And I started going to meetings at I think it was then called UMHE, United Ministries in Higher Education.
It's now ACM, yes.
And I was actually at a meeting where there were still women attending, but they had reached a breaking point. And one of them stood up and said, I have a statement to make, and she read it through a series of essentially descriptions of problems that women were facing with the organization being too patriarchal, that they're feeling cut off, shut out from some of the important stuff. And it really wasn't meeting the needs. And all of the women got up and left. And it was maybe a year later that the February Sisters took over the East Asian building.
Right,
And,
right, yes.
and so that was all, I was witness to some of that at least.
And Rich, I actually did include that in the book, and so you're in there too. And I think it's a myth to imagine it was all, happy and wonderfully cohesive. Within groups, there's always conflict and things that have to be worked out. And I think that was one of the issues, finding ways to be inclusive related to gender. Yeah. Thank you.
Let me throw one more story out because I happen to know it, and not a lot of people do. I just happen to be friends of a friend of a university administrator in the 1970s. And at one point, I think it was in maybe 76 or 77, there had been several rapes on campus. And they brought in an outside security consultant to to sort of survey the situation essentially. And I do know, happen to know that one part of the report that was submitted to the Chancellor's office said that there was a group of men, the rapes were of course happening in the darker areas of campus like Cloggers Lake. And this report said there's a group of men on campus that are actually an asset to the security of women because they have no interest in them. They're around these same dark areas, but they can, if they witness stuff, they will be agents to prevent it. They're potentially there, and makes essentially telling story how having gay men around is not a bad thing. And there were people in the administration in Strong who tried to keep that from staying in, but there was one person in particular who managed to say, no, this is going to the Chancellor as it was written. That stuff is not going to be exposed.
Well, that's
So-
one I've never heard.
Administrators who were helping.
Yeah, I personally, I'm hoping that this book, there are a lot of people like Elaine, she didn't really participate, did she?
Writing book 2.
Pardon me?
Writing book 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, or at least for the Spencer archives, people who read the book could then write their own stories and add it to the archive. Yeah. And photographs. Does anybody know Chris Avery from that time? She was a photographer, and I wonder what happened to all her photographs. We know Stephen Stillwell had videos, didn't he?
I'm not sure.
I heard that those videos were thrown away at one point.
Yeah, and Richard Linker had a bunch of stuff in his apartment
And
burned
he had a
down,
fire.
so that was all lost. But I can vaguely remember some of John Stevens' home movies. Well, just like Peter Fallon on the front, coming out on the front porch at True Corner and. Just-
Dancing, probably.
Basically, yes, I think he was holding a pie or
Maybe it's-
something.
Maybe it's better if that's lost to time. Just think about it.
Right, well, I don't want to see anything of me like that.
Well, I happen to know of a secret stash of films.
Oh, now it's all coming out, right?
Anyway, yes, there was recorded evidence.
And this is a good time to plug the archives that anybody who has photos, material, anything written, it's so wonderful if you have it in the archives. They're happy to have it. And it is really unfortunate for history like this to get lost because it's not written down anywhere. And I can say going through so many UDKs that, so much of the information didn't get recorded. So please do that. It would be a wonderful contribution.
All right.
So I think at this point, asking for questions.
Sure. If we have time for one or two more questions, but we want to make sure we have time for the signing at the end as well.
Yes.
So I have a quick question, or maybe not.
Yes.
That might not have a quick answer. I don't know. But did the UDK and the Journal World and any other papers, did they get better about reporting
Yes,
these
they
things as the
did.
decade went on? Yeah.
Actually, I don't have the numbers in my head, but when the LGLF formed, I went through and there were something like, I don't know, maybe like 9 articles in the Kansan. And then I went in like a number of years later, and I have the numbers in the book, but they aren't springing in my head. And there were a significant number more, which I thought was really important because there was certainly the external climate, but I'm sure LGLF had a lot to do with it as well.
Great.
Yeah. And I do want to mention, I really thank Watkins for hosting this, for all the work that you did through, the time to help with this project. Will has been a wonderful collaborator, and I look around the room, I wouldn't have been able to put that book together without the help of many of you in the room. And I'll put Susan on the spot. If my dissertation committee had not been so supportive and helpful, it never would have gotten past that point. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, and thanks to everybody.